What's up guys, how you all doing? Welcome to another video. So today we're talking about what I think are the most important things you should look for in a sports camera. By that I mean maybe you're deciding which camera to buy next, maybe looking at whether or not a camera is right for you. If you're intending on shooting sports, there are certain things that you should have higher up your priority list. And today I'm going to share with you what I think those top 5 things are. Before we get into this, I'm sorry it's been a week or so since you guys have seen a new video from me. Been a lot going on in the Samples household, hence why it's a little bit messy. If you can see some of that mess in the background, I don't have the table in front of me, there's been stuff going on in here. And I've also been working on my second channel. Some of you guys know about the second channel, some of you don't. Go check it out, History in Your Hand. I've been making some cool videos over there. There's a link in the description below, so I'd urge you to go check it out. If you like my stuff, you might like some of that stuff. Check that out, that's my second channel. Right, let's get into this. I'm going to go backwards. So I'm going to start with what I think is the 5th most important thing, and then I'm going to work forwards to the 4th and the 3rd and the 2nd and the 1st and so on, right the way through to what I think is the most important thing that you should look for in a camera. So let's start with number 5. And that is what I'm going to call the ergonomics of the camera. Now, this for me is down in number 5 because actually the other 4 things I would rate above it, and if the ergonomics aren't quite where I want them, I'll get used to them as a trade-off for those other 4 things being better. But still, ergonomics are important, and that's why it hits my top 5. You will want to have a camera that you feel comfortable using. For some of you, that might mean a camera like this, the 1DX, that has the built-in grip on the side, especially if you're going to be shooting a lot of upright sports. Some of you might be familiar with certain camera bodies. You might be shooting with Canon or Nikon or Sony, in which case you're going to want something that operates roughly the same way. The button's in about the same place. That's going to be important for you. And that's why I've said number 5, ergonomics of the camera. I think that is an important thing. Okay, let's move from there into number 4. And that is going to be the capability of the buffer on that camera. Some of you will know exactly what I'm talking about when I say that. Some of you, maybe not so much. So when you're shooting sports, you tend to shoot a lot of photos. You tend to shoot photos in bursts. And then those images have to process in your camera and save onto a memory card. And the camera's ability to do that with a lot of frames very, very quickly, well, that is all to do with the buffer on that camera. Some cameras with a smaller buffer or a less capable buffer will get kind of slowed up, and you might have seen that before. You'll shoot off 10-12 frames and then the camera kind of goes into go slow mode and the images are processing and then it kicks back in. Well, that's because the buffer on the camera is full. And if you're going to be shooting photos, firing off lots of frames, especially in bursts, then the buffer ability of a camera is going to be really important for you if you are shooting sports. The worst thing you could do is have a player moving forwards in a football, soccer game, going to have a shot on goal, you get some cool photos of the shot, then the buffer's all blocked up, you can't do anything, and you miss the moment of the actual goal. That would be horrendous. So that was number 4. Moving into number 3, and for me that is the ISO or high ISO or low light capability of that camera. Now, a lot of people really focus on this one. For some people this is going to be number 1, maybe number 2. For me it's number 3 because I think the other 2 things are more important. Low light capability is certainly an important factor if you're going to shoot a lot of indoor sports like I do. I shoot a lot of basketball. With that in mind, I'm going to need a camera that has the capability of shooting at that kind of ISO levels, where the image quality is still usable. I'm not worried about a little bit of noise. I'm not saying about a camera that has no noise, but a camera where the noise is manageable, where it's not so bad that it ruins the image quality. That for me is going to be the 3rd most important thing. Okay, so moving into number 2. And for me, this is the frames per second of that camera. Now, you can get cameras with some insane frames per second, especially now the mirrorless ones. You're looking at 30 frames per second at the higher end, maybe even more. My R6, for example, would do 20 frames per second when I'm shooting with the electronic shutter, and it gets really, really fast. Cameras like the 1DX Mark II and even the old 1DX will still do 10 frames per second. As you move backwards a little bit beyond that, cameras like the 7D Mark II, I think that was doing like 8 or 9 frames per second. And as you move back into some of the older cameras, they tend to get a bit slower. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying if you have a camera that shoots 5 frames per second you can't shoot sports, because you absolutely can. But you are going to struggle to get what I would call the peak moment of the action compared to a camera that shoots, let's say, 10 frames per second. Because in simple terms, in 1 second of action, which could be a player flying through the air for a big dunk, in a second of that action, one person's going to get 5 frames, and the person with the 10 frames per second camera, well, they're going to get 10 frames. And that means that when you're looking back through those frames and you're picking the best one, the peak action, where the guy's right there by the rim, well, you have more chance of getting that with the more frames per second, the more frames that you are shooting with that camera in one go. Now, you guys out there with cameras that are shooting 4 or 5 frames per second, don't be put off. You can absolutely shoot sports with those cameras, but I'm talking about kind of the top 1 or 2 things if we're looking at a sports camera going forwards. And that brings me on to number 1. What do I think is the most important thing in a sports camera? Well, I tell you what, first of all, you tell me, what do you think is the most important thing in a sports camera? Hit the pause button on this video, go down to the comments and let me know, because I'm interested to see what you think before I share with you my view. So I'm just going to sit right here, I'm going to let you go put that in the comments, you go do your thing. And then hopefully you're back and you're ready to go. So here's mine. My number 1 most important thing is the autofocus capability of that camera. For me, this is the most important one. When you're shooting sports, you've got players running forwards, backwards, sideways, diagonal, all different angles. Their faces are over here, their faces are over there. They've got arms and legs and everything. And if you have frames that don't lock focus, well, it can ruin your entire thing. It can ruin an entire set of images if you don't manage to get good locked focus on those shots. Now, the good news is that there are plenty of cameras with great autofocus systems. Of course, I'm very familiar with Canon, and even as you move back through some of the older cameras now, I say a 7D2 like it's an ancient camera, it's not, but it's a little bit older now, well, that still has fantastic autofocus. The 1DX, the original one, fantastic autofocus. Things like the 5D Mark IV, again, fantastic autofocus. As you move into some of the newer cameras, things like the R6, the R5, the R3, the face detection they have, the way you can track eyes and all sorts, the autofocus is fantastic. And that's why those cameras are now pushing to the top of the sports cameras that are out there. Things like the Canon R3 and maybe the Canon R1, if ever we see one, probably have the best autofocus out there. And that's why nowadays, if you go to shoot a professional sports event, you will see a whole lot of Canon R3s, because the autofocus really is arguably the most important thing when it comes to shooting sports. Okay, so there you go. That's my top 5 things. Hopefully that helps you guys. If you're looking for your next camera that you intend on shooting sports with, let me know in the comments below. What kind of camera are you looking at next? Make sure you do me a favour, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Make sure you hit that like button because it helps me out loads and loads on my videos. In the meantime, guys, thank you very much for watching. I will see you on the next video.